that. Keep going.
That's what we're doing. Right.
Just one on the Facebook. Yeah.
Let's see which is the right.
It's a bit, isn't it?
Who invented that? Or the little squares that go along and you're waiting and waiting.
Someone who wanted to be annoying.
Aha. We're there.
Well, leave it to it.
Okay, right. Off we go. I realised today. Stop talking in the back row. I realised today that I could just go on and trying to exclude stuff is for me has become more difficult than trying to find stuff to include. So every time I put a set of slides together, and then I think, oh, I've left something out. No, so it goes on. And, but there we are. Can't cover everything. So here we are then on the final fling, and I want to look at what makes Weston unique in terms of its architecture. Can you all see the screen? Is that okay? Or do you need more darkness in here? Okay. I'm just at the flank here. I can hardly see it from that. Right. So we can't talk about Western architecture without mentioning this one particular person, Hans Fowler Price, who has stamped his style right throughout stone Weston. He is an incredible person in terms of the influence he's brought to bear on Weston. Born Langford, just down the road, so he's a Somerset person. He went off to Liverpool to serve his articles. In those days, of course, if you wanted to be an architect or a lawyer, you went and paid for the privilege of serving your articles, and if you were successful, you were then taken on. He was successful. The master, Thomas Barry, he had a quirky approach to architecture, and I think that came through to his pupils. So Hans Fowler Price became a very quirky architect back here in Weston. It was an era when there was a growing interest in medievalism. We were moving away from the sort of classical 18th century style, and we were moving even further back really into the romantic era of castles and you know, we ended up designing railway stations that looked like cathedrals and cathedrals that looked like railway stations. All part of that romantic growing interest in medievalism and the Oxford movement in terms of ecclesiology, a turn back in religious thinking to the days of the pre-Reformation era. So it's all about towers and spires and lots of Latin and smells and bells. The reinvention of a Gothic style. This was all part of the way people were thinking. It was the same in literature. It was all the growth of the Romantic era, and this just happened to coincide, or Hans Fowler Price's lifespan coincided with that. So he was very much of his era. He was an incredibly hard-working person. I mean, in Weston, he became a town commissioner. That's an early councillor. So there was his political commitment. He had the right connections. Always helps if you're going to be an architect to have the right connections. And he was a man of tremendous business acumen. He knew how to make projects work and pay for themselves. He had convictions about the purpose of architecture. It wasn't simply a thing of putting up a shed and you went in and occupied it. There were reasons why certain styles had to be used. He was a lifelong temperance supporter, and this was an era when alcoholism was it was a national plague. Nothing like today. I mean, you see half a dozen idiots on the Italian gardens pie-eyed, and that's it. But go back to his earlier life, and alcoholism was a major problem. He was a very modest man, but as often happens with people who are modest, in his profession, he was anything but modest. He was flamboyant, and that often happens with people in the arts. He, of course, was born at a time when the population was rising, the economy was growing, the way in which people organised themselves was changing. We were moving into local government, prosperity and housing demands. So he was just there at the right time. And he had this unbelievable, well, not unbelievable, it's quite believable, loyalty to West. This was his town, and therefore he put everything into it. And you often find nowadays people in the professions come to a town to work in those towns, but they don't actually give anything else. They're too busy, or they claim to be too busy. But again, they can't go home. And so the days in Weston when you would have the local doctors, the magistrates, the bank managers, all taking part in running the town, those days have gone. Because they all go to Brent Knoll or wherever and pretend they live in the countryside. He also had this ability to gather round him an expert team of assistants, and that's often the way in which a practice would expand, not just the boss but the people around him. So it was an incredibly productive team, and it went on right up until our time. I certainly remember the company Coffin, Jones and Roden. They were the descendants of Hans Price's company. Here is where he died, in Trewartha Park, appropriately in a house he had designed. So here was his last style of work. Interesting in that that's clearly Edwardian and not Victorian. In many ways he was ahead of his time. So here was the house he designed, one on the right hand side. I photographed the name, it's called Bourne. But there's only the letter N left of it now, and I bet the people in there don't realise that the most famous, the most productive architect in Weston-super-Mare lived in that house. Of course, they're all flats. His first public commission in Weston was at, just round the corner, at what is now the Blake Hay Theatre, and was the Wadham Street Baptist Church. He didn't design it, it was already there, it went up in 1850. But he reordered it a decade or so later, 1862, and that is what it was and became. Now, I think I've shown these before, but that is the nave or the auditorium, and that is what it is today. It's been converted into the Blake Hay Theatre, and the stage is set upon the baptistry. Whether the water is still in the baptistry, I don't know, but if there's a big orchestra, then perhaps they will find out. And just to recap, it was severely damaged in the air raid of 1941, but subsequently rebuilt, certainly on the old line. So there we have it today, the Blake Hay, formerly the Baptist Church. And an interesting use of stone, even though Hans Price isn't responsible for this, it is that mixture of Bath stone, which, as I said before, could only be used in Weston once the railway was here to bring the stone in, and local pink Carboniferous limestone. There's a line of pink limestone going through Weston, coming out at the upper reaches of the Milton Road quarry, and the stone was quarried from small quarries. So every so often in Weston you see the grey Carboniferous buildings, and then every so often a pink building, and that's our local pink limestone. And you can see the pilasters and the pilasters being the flat bits which are just attached to the building, and the pillars being the completely round ones. Corinthian style pillars and pilasters. Corinthian simply meaning most decorated, very flamboyant things. So, and there you can see, and these wonderful, wonderful shapes. Are they green men? Yes, they are. This you can see. These are they're actual animals, and out of them sprout leaves and all sorts of strange tongues and things coming out of the ears, and acanthus leaves. So that's part of the exuberant style that was becoming popular. He then moves just up the road to build his first standalone church. So he created this, the Bristol Road Baptist Church, 1866, and it's still there. Some of the additions have been somewhat worn by the elements. That's the problem with Bath stone. Bath stone's a very soft stone, easily eroded, certainly by the salt we have here. But those creatures, they're not exactly meant to welcome you to God, are they? They're rather, they're rather frightening. They're meant to frighten you. It's all part of this. If you don't, they'll come and get you in the afterlife. There we are. As I said before, so it's a fascinating building. It looks to me as though that's a minaret rather than a spire. Not quite sure why a spire is there in any case, but as a building, it's an attractive building. And inside, as I mentioned when I was talking about the difference between the high church movement and low church, very much centred on the word. So the important structure there is the pulpit, from which the word is delivered. And pulpits were arranged quite often in 3 decks. So by the time you got to the upper deck and you were tub thumping in a sort of Ian Paisley way, you have the audience, the congregation, properly paying attention to you, where the people who simply read the lessons would be down on the lower deck. So, as opposed to an altar, which has the sacramental centrality to it. He was a churchman. He was an Anglican, but did lots of work for all sorts of other branches of Christianity. So he was by no means a prejudiced Anglican. In Christchurch, he didn't design Christchurch, but he was the church warden there for half a century. Quite useful if you're running a church to have an architect as your church warden. Saves a bob or two, and many clergy would love to have an architect on their parochial church councils nowadays. But there's Christchurch. Unusually for Somerset, it has a spire. Somerset is a county of towers and not spires. But here we have in Victorian times, anything goes really. So if you want a spire, hey, we'll have a spire. But here I found this photograph. I can't remember where it came from. Less than a year ago, and it's the oldest photograph I've seen of this area. It's delightful, isn't it? This is the boulevard. There's Christchurch. This is Montpellier. Those are Christchurch steps, which still go up to. And these very grand houses set in their own grounds. Nothing built on the other side, so huge gardens. And here, this would be Gerard Road down here. This would be, I suppose our photograph would have been taken from what became the library, telephone exchange, that. And interestingly, this is obviously a track, but all the trees have just been planted. So it looks as though they were really environmentally conscious then. They put the trees in before they actually laid the road out. A bit like going to Spain, where you'll see pavements and roads and no houses for about 10 years after they've laid out the roads, where we do it the other way round. So there's Christchurch, clearly with that great view. Now I had always assumed that when the boulevard was laid out, Smith Pigott Boulevard, you had the Royal Hotel at the one end, and the other stop was Christchurch Spire. Yes, but here you can see Christchurch is already there, so the road was clearly laid to line up either with that or to follow field boundaries, and I suspect they both happened to be correct. Christchurch was built in 1855 by a Bath company, Manners and Gill. Manners was the City of Bath architect, and Weston attracted Bath architects to the town. The chancel was added. Chancel is the bit up here. This is the nave where the congregation sits. Up at the other end it's the chancel and the sanctuary, so that was added a bit later, 1878, and then the clerestory or clerestory was put on the top by Price in 1890. Reason for that is, imagine the roof being there, it would have been quite gloomy inside. So if you stick it up another floor and puncture the walls with light, then you get more natural light coming in. Remember, in those days, life would have been pretty gloomy. Nowadays we can have all sorts of fancy uplighters and cast the gloom of doom away from us. And this was the view then, which John Hugh Smith Pigott created by making his boulevard home in a rather Parisian way on the view blocker at the end, which is Christ Church. And here you can see the trees are now getting mature around here into what was becoming Gerrard Road. Houses on the north side, preceding houses on the south side, and here then is Christ Church Primary School. That later was developed with a row of substantial Victorian houses, and at this end, where the donkey cart is, the library as we entered the 20th century. Those houses were subsequently demolished to make way for the telephone exchange. But you can still see there, can't you, that Christ Church is very much that end of the boulevard. It's the whole thing about having a vista, a view. Until, of course, we come along in the 1970s and stick that thing in front of it. Nobody here lives. I've done this before. And one very embarrassing. The owner of the house was there, but though he agreed. It should never have been allowed there. It's completely ruined that view along the boulevard. He then, we're still on Hans Price. He then had commissions from the Methodist Church to build what was known as the Boulevard Methodist Church, still there, but that was closed in the mid-1950s when the Congregational Chapel in the Boulevard had been bombed, what is now the United Reformed Church. The congregation decamped down the road to a recently redundant Methodist church here. So they went into that church on a temporary basis. Then in 1955 they came out because the new United Reformed Church had been built, and this then became a redundant ecclesial building, and it was then converted into temporal use. And you can see here how that rather poor window door entrance is just been stuck on. Nothing to accord with the origins of the build, and these windows have been hopelessly sort of punched into the wall with no idea of design at all. And so most people would look at that building and think, well, what is it? And you really have to stand back and think, oh yes, it was a church. He's showing again his breadth of ecclesial appointments. He then goes to the Exclusive Brethren to design their chapel, the Waterloo Hall in Waterloo Street. Now, this particular branch of Christianity didn't want anything fussy, and so they went for the bog standard classical design. Hall inside and very simple classical frontage. They certainly weren't going to have anything spiky like towers and spires. St John's, which, as you'll remember, I said, had been built in 1824. The medieval village church had been completely razed to the ground, and the new the new Georgian church had been built. But it very quickly wasn't large enough. In those days, everybody went to church, either because they believed, or because it was a socially done thing, or because their betters wouldn't employ them unless they did go to church. So people went. And so the church was very quickly not large enough for the growing congregation. And first of all, a north aisle was added, and then Price and his colleague Wooler, at the last decade of the 19th century, added this south aisle. Really huge windows. Unfortunately, inside St John's, you don't get the effect of these enormous windows because there are balconies. So the balcony actually cuts right across there, and inside you get no appreciation. And it's interesting, in this day and age when you don't need those balconies, why not take them out and restore the light that would come in? But there we are. Interestingly, all that's left of the medieval church is the preaching cross, the base of the Calvary there. The top of it obviously hacked off by Puritans. And then Price's colleague, Sidney Wilde, comes along to design the Locking Road Church St Saviour's, as I said last week, on the ridiculously grand scale. I mean, this was designed to seat 800 people. In 1892, within a short space of time, we were at the First World War, and all the men coming back, those who came back, sorry mate, I'm not going to church. So on the whole, churches which were not finished by 1914 were never going to be finished. And so you ended up with truncated bits. So this one ended up with that temporary west wall, known as a temporary west wall, but in fact it's the permanent west wall. And inside, a style which is completely divorced from anything you would know in Somerset. This is a city, spiky, high church style, internal brickwork. And that's the inside, the gargoyles, and that's the West End today, because it's been divided into a block of flats. So. Now, Hans Fowler Price had his practice in Waterloo Street, and so here was his practice, and he designed this row of buildings, and it's very handsome. Of course, we all have to look up, don't we? We messed up so much at ground floor, but other floors we have a lot. And this is a rather handsome. I'm not sure when this bit went up. I must do some more research on that. But it's a unified entity, other than of course the bottom part. Apart from that very good fish and chip shop, which has an excellent and jolly good fish and chips as well. But this is where his exuberance really came. He designs the Mercury office, interestingly, designed for the newspaper and is still the home of the newspaper. So we have done what Fleet Street has abandoned. We've kept our printing headquarters. And he builds this in 1885, and then a couple of years later, you can tell I took that photograph some time ago because it was the sports shop and is now more interested in death than sport. But it's an extraordinary building. Price is said to have modelled it on Saragossa Cathedral. So here is Saragossa Cathedral. If you can actually see the link, then okay. I'm a bit hard pressed to find but apparently this is where his inspiration came from to design that. I mean, to me, it's a mixture of all sorts of strange European things. This looks vaguely Manuelian Portuguese. I'm not quite sure who's meant to be up there. The sub-editors firing arrows down weekly letter writers, I don't know. But it's a fascinating building. And look at it up close. These are really, it's the sort of thing nobody could afford to build. We could do it, but you'd have to pay a fortune to do it. And here, St Fiacca, the patron of gardens and hemorrhoids. Now, quite, you'll have to explain it, but I don't understand. I don't understand the link between gardening and hemorrhoids. There must be one. Perhaps
it's all the straining.
All the straining. That's obviously it. There you are. And interestingly, this niche had been there for ever and a day, but nothing was ever there. And I can't remember it, but this used to be a greengrocer's shop. Hence, much later in the day, they put this statue there. So here is the dear saint with his shovel, and it looks like he's either holding a string of hemorrhoids, or it's a string of onions.
With a cross at the end.
Sorry?
With the cross at the bottom there.
It's rosary.
Oh, it's his rosary. It's his rosary. There. Yes, there was I. Right.
Thank you.
Oh, that spoiled the story, really.
Sorry.
Don't interrupt
Much better
again, will
with his
you?
hemorrhoids.
Where across the road he'd been employed by the local Masonic Lodge, because he was a Mason. Anyone in architecture then, any aspiring local business person was in the lodge. That's the way blokes got together, and they had their little ceremonies, and they had their feasts, and the wives stayed at home, and anyone who was anyone in the aspiring world of local business became a Mason. And Hans Fowler Price designed the new Masonic Lodge of St Q, which is still there. There is dear St Q. Unfortunately, in 1981, this Bavarian timber top was removed. I cannot find a photograph of it. I mean, I've only got that really very ordinary sketch. So if anyone has a photograph or postcard, of the original. There you are, you postcard people, get on, and there's bound to be one somewhere of that Bavarian turret. You know, it's a piece of Hans Price's exuberant eccentricity, and there's the saint. I mean, yes, and he's not holding his hemorrhoids. Those are the knots. But I'm not quite sure who St. Q. I'm not even sure St. Q existed. Couch Stoke is the name. But anyhow, it's quite nice to have him there, blessing the crowds as they enter their den of iniquity, and it's a drinking parlour now, isn't it? It's the Constitutional Club. And here we are looking from interesting window designs, again in that sort of Tudor Great Western Railway style, looking down, and you can still see from a certain angle what you ought to be seeing at the end. Then across the road for St John's, he built St John's Church Institute, which was a wonderful bit of sort of Oxbridge College design until St John's PCC in 1983 sold it and allowed the bottom part of it to be so mucked about, and you can see it's being done there. It's now completely lost its feel. Upstairs is still there, but and what a pity. But anyhow, spilt milk and all that. But above the door, I mean, you look at that. I often use that photograph and I show people just that and say, where is it? And I go, don't know. But either side, I rather like it when architects put these, built 1881, rebuilt 1983. So if we don't remember, at least it's on the wall there. And I've noticed a couple of people in their new houses on the hill have put the date on. That's great. That's what future generations want. The boulevard, of course, when it started, was a reasonably high-class residential street. It's only more latterly become a commercial street. As the town grows, so commerce moves out, takes over the residential streets, and as trade decreases now, thanks to the internet, it's coming back in. And so we're seeing those streets which were converted into shops being reconverted back into residential, and everyone's up in arms and it's awful what's happening to that. No, we're just repeating ourselves. History does that. But this is a nice unified street. Even the roof lines are still there. Some of the windows have been severely mucked about. I mean, there you've got the original sash, so the top sash is still. Here you've got these cheap. So put a bit of plastic across the top and put two square windows in and completely spoil it. Why can't people do the job properly? But at least the barge boardings there. Weston has more barge boarding, it is reckoned, than any other town in England, given the size of Weston. Now, I can't prove it, but I'd certainly like somebody to prove it. But neither can you prove me wrong. So, I mean, you walk around the town and just look up at the barge boarding. It's incredible. And as I said last week, here along the boulevard, halfway down, we have what there is the Summer and Winter Gardens, which became, of course, the Tivoli Theatre and later cinema, Bohemian Love, as a risque for Weston-super-Mare. And then Bond, it was firebombed. It could have been saved, it could have been rebuilt, but in England, I think, A, we wanted to get over the war, quite rightly so, and B, we wanted to look forward. So rebuilding our Victorian dowdies, no, let's go on Festival of Britain, brand new world, and now all the generations that never experienced that are saying, why did we spoil it? But there we are, we're always doing that. And we've replaced it with that, which I'm sure, I've never been in, but I'm sure those who live have wonderful flats, but I'm sorry, as a piece of architecture, I'm quite what this thing is stuck there. Horrid. There we are. Now, this is Hans Price's, I think, most exuberant building. The amount of money, everybody jokes about the money the college has, but it certainly had money then. They could really afford to build in style. And it is said to be, I love the hyperactive Jacobean cum Flemish style. In other words, bits of everything, but it's certainly hyperactive. wonderful, wonderful building. I think in a funny way, the two rather match. Here's the one, the brutal 1970s concrete with the building, and they work. But look at the detail of it. All this decorative work by this person, Steele of Bristol. You can see here the dragons. These are proper dragons. These are proper Somerset beasts, aren't they? Are they dragons? Are they griffins? Are they wyverns? Depends where the tail is. Depends how many legs there are. And again, the green men, and of course the necessary things to keep the wretched pigeons and seagulls off the structure. But the college spent a fortune restoring it. I mean, they've done a splendid job. And you just look at these. I mean, which former principal was that, I wonder? And again, you can see the leaves coming out of his face, out of his ears, nostrils, and so on. And this rather cherubic one, and again, it's. And so this is really wonderful decorative stuff, isn't it? Then Hans Price is brought in with another of his partners, William Jane, to build Walliscote School. This is in the Flemish Renaissance style, and I can't remember if I mentioned last week, but there was supposed to be an architectural competition for the designing of this school. This is the first of the state schools in Weston. The Forster Act of 1870 had been passed. Weston spent the next 25 years refusing to have state interference in education. It belonged to the church. And so when the state had its first school open, the Undersecretary of State for Education came down to open it, and they had spent so much money on this building. I think it was to make a political statement. We're going to build a state school, and we're going to make sure it looks tremendous. And they did. Mind you, the architectural competition on the governing body sat Hans Fowler Price. So the contract, the commission was awarded to Hans Fowler Price. And I've no idea what other plans had been submitted. They must have been submitted. Where they were, maybe they're somewhere in files, but I haven't seen any. But anyhow, who's complaining? These wonderful, clearly demarcation by gender, boys. But this is very much the Hans Price style. These wonderful lanterns, which are air vents. They let foul air out. Don't forget, they were all heated by internal coke combustion fires. Now, they're illegal today. I mean, so many of our cathedrals have had their stonework destroyed by that. Heaven knows what happened to the inside of our lungs as a result of being subject to those. So these lanterns are the way of getting foul air out. And it's very much the Price style. He loved designing these. So down the road, less money was available then to be spent on the next of his schools, the Locking Road schools in 1899, and then the next bit, 1905. And again, look at these wonderful, so this is Russia, isn't it? These are orthodox onion domes. He's having fun there. I sketched the two of the difference between them. And even on the, dare I say, the lesser buildings, he liked playing around with his domes. This is Christchurch Primary School, and this is where? Clue is the top.
Limestone. Limestone? No.
Getting in the right
Victorian
direction, but
it's the Victorian tea room.
that's it. That's it. It's the Victorian tea room, the top of it, and this is pure Hans Price. That's now missing. It fell off, but it's in a council yard somewhere. So hopefully one day it'll be put back. He was also commissioned to build Weston's first hospital, the Alfred Street Dispensary, 1866. Remember, this is way before NHS, way before health insurance. This is rich people pay for doctors, the rest, well, bad luck. And opposite, he built the Alfred Street Warehouse. Again, very interesting architectural style, now converted into residential, but very much of his style. Then taken along halfway between Weston and Uphill to take over the former halfway house, the Smuggler's Pub, and converted into a sanatorium. the 1860s, the great rise in the sanatorium movement. It was a national, international movement. People deciding that there were so many respiratory problems, people living in growing cities, get them out to the countryside, get them out to the seaside, and this would benefit. They didn't really know why, but of course we subsequently did find out that having fresh air was good for you. And so here in Weston, the Royal West of England Sanatorium was built and subsequently converted, of course, into Royal Sands. Some of the finest buildings in the country, when you think of it, magistrates' courts, hospitals, churches, railway stations, all sorts of things, lunatic asylums, have been converted into really expensive, upmarket apartments. Something a bit odd, isn't it? We do that. But there we are. Hey ho. And here it is, looking very much like a mid-19th century teacher training college, built on that ecclesiastical style. There's the chapel, and here's the way in, and this will produce to start with the women teachers and then men teachers as well. And it needed to have a chapel, because if you went to a sanatorium, there was no guarantee you were going to come out. So probably just as well if you were there to pop into the chapel every so often and prepare yourself for what might lie ahead. Again, it looks just like a public school chapel, doesn't it? You could imagine all the kids in there first thing every morning singing their hymns, and the headmaster ranting to them, and off they go to lessons. So that's his work. Next in the town centre we have James Wilson. Wilson is an important addition because he built our first town hall. Emmanuel Church, again, Manners and Gill, 1847. But the reason I've interjected that is that Price extended it in 1897. So if you see what it was like here, unfortunately I don't have a photograph, only that print. And Price had extended it. So a very important player in extending Weston Town Hall. And these are his additions. A council chamber up here and his clock tower, which was then further extended late 1920s by his company, Fry, Patterson and Jones, in what is amusingly referred to as the Post Office Georgian style. So here we have this, which has completely enveloped the bell tower. So that looks as though it, in a peculiar way, sort of sticks out of this totally architecturally disjointed base. Price then comes along to the boulevard for the public library. Now, I don't think it's his, it's from his company, but I'm convinced that Wilde, his partner, who liked using brick, is the person who was responsible for St Saviour's Church, the Boulevard Library, and the original post office where the Sovereign Centre is. So I think that's the hallmark of Wilde. 1900, you can see the design here, the front, copied at the back. They run out of money, so they only build the front and the side, and that bit is put on later, but obviously there's a smaller budget, and so it's not as good as the frontage. But a really interesting library building. The person who gave all the books to start with, a lawyer from Chew Magna, gave this vast collection of books to Weston on condition they build a public library. So the councillors who they didn't really think that educating the masses was particularly healthy, because they might get thought about their stations in life. But in the end they did, and they called it the Queen Victoria the Jubilee Library. Okay, it was 2 years behind her Jubilee, but certainly was. And the carvings above it, designed by this man Harry Hems of Exeter, I mentioned before, a great ecclesiastical carver and designer, based in Exeter, produced some really good work. And these are the muses, which have been wonderfully restored and cleaned now, as we await the buildings conversion into, yes, residential use. And you can see these are the Greek concept, the muses representing the arts, literature, painting, food, music, and the law. And those are standard, and he designed these. But also in Emmanuel Church, this wonderful pulpit, marble pulpit. It's one of the finest pulpits in the West Country, and people don't really appreciate it. It's a stunning piece of carved work in marble and French stone.
Yeah.
And here is that General Post Office by Price and Wild Direct. This is it with the addition of the later telephone exchange. And you can see how that's changed. It was there, and then they stuck something on top. So there it is, a handsome building. And again, with hindsight, why didn't we keep that and build the Sovereign Centre behind it? But there we are. And there are all the posties in their wagons. Of course, the post office wasn't the only form of communication. We had the telegraph office, and this is definitely by Sydney Wilde. It's still there in Richmond Street. There were two transatlantic cables taking messages from the UK to America. One of them through Liverpool, one through Western. So this was a major communication link with North America. So important was it in the First War that this had armed guards around it. And in the Second War, it was on the hit list by the Luftwaffe. And it's an eatery now. But those symbols are still there. This is the symbol of the Atlantic Telegraph Company, and that is on one of the shelters on the seafront. It's a piece of cable, because just out in the sea, that's where the transatlantic cable went down, and hey ho, all the way to Ireland and America. Price's last commission, though he didn't do it, he was too old, but it still came from his practice, was the Gaslight Company workshops in 1912. William Jane was actually the person who drew it up, but it was still Price's company. So we like to say the museum is Price's last commission. And this photo, taken 1937, you can see it. When people say, oh, this is the gasworks, no. It's the Gaslight Company offices and workshops. And that's the building today, suitably restored into Weston's museum. He had some work on Burnbeck Pier. I've highlighted his bits there, the clock tower and the North Lifeboat House, the later pavilion, don't forget, burnt down in the 1890s, and the South Lifeboat House. So those are bits of Price's work, and the clock tower looking very sorry for itself nowadays. Piermaster's house, I put a question mark on that because may or may not have been. The jury is still out on that one. It would be nice to think it is his work. And here in Clarence Park, clearly a royal jubilee. He didn't design the flowers. This is his work. The rather fine Edwardian gatehouse. Here in the town centre, not just churches and things like that, but also commercial properties. Somerset House, clearly having designed this and spent a lot of money on this facade, they'd run out of cash, and so you get this rather brick side. So you're not meant to look at that, and it's been designed in such a way that if they'd had a bob or two left over, they could have finished it in Bath stones. So they've got the Bath stone there, and the cheapo brick there. And the Somerset House, it was an entity right the way along to what became the YMCA. Of course, it included the Market House, which had been converted into the Playhouse Theatre and then burnt down, and we have the modern theatre. But again, in detail, it's stunningly good detail. And right the way along, if you look down through the little old post office lane, you can look up at these wonderful things, and these Venetian windows, again in desperate need of restoration, and the removal of totally inappropriate window frames. He also designed this at the Shaftesbury Hotel, which was, as you see, family and commercial. There it is. Go back. That's the Shaftesbury Hotel, and there it is, Magdala Buildings. And if you again, this is so typical of Weston. If you look from the top of the ground floor upwards, it is a very handsome row of, and nothing has been destroyed. Only above the former barbecue have they put in plastic window. Every well still has the sash windows, but it's the ground floor which leaves much to be desired. I mean, these are. Look at that. That's the centre. I mean, there you've got that balcony. Imagine on Carnival night you've got your own balcony. You could charge a fortune for people coming in to view from there. Up on the hill, Price designed lots of individual buildings. The hillside is a mix of individual, standalone buildings, houses, and terraces, crescents. And here in Grove Park, in the 1890s, this mix of Tudor and Gothic architecture. South Road, Cecil Road, the villas. And even here, there's this wonderful eccentric property, which most people can't see because you have to go up there to get into it. And this is the chalet. Price designed this for Wooler in what's referred to as fancy dress Bavarian. Because Wooler had some Bavarian background, so here's Price designing a house for his colleague, and it's a wonderful building. And here, 85 Upper Church Road, in his Moorish style. He'd gone off to North Africa at one point and began to get some interest there. So you can see, look at these windows. These are Moorish windows, aren't they? Look at the tiling. This is straight out of Islam. It's wonderful. And look at these gate pillars here. There. Just tacked on a house in Weston, thankfully still there and looked after. And the important thing, I mean, he realised that if you're building a terrace or you're building a pair of semi-Ds, those who live in the one semi-D have got to respect the accompanying house. So you don't muck up the windows, you don't paint one half and so here in Gerard Road you can see these two semis still have that respect, one for the other, in terms of, even though the windows have been replaced and some aren't, you know, these are a bit naff, but you know, it hasn't been spoiled. And again, this attention to idiosyncratic detail. Which prince or king or potentate is that looking? And further along the boulevard, in this Dutch style, he was just playing around with all different styles, and yet he produced this unifying feel. I mean, look at that. A couple of doors away, this style, and that. Two completely different styles, but 3 doors from each other. And it all works. And this is the pink limestone you can see there, again in the boulevard. And these wonderful, look at those chimney pots. Not sure what that thing is stuck out the top, or but anyhow, that's. And he was also, it wasn't just the grand houses, he was also designing for the working people down on the levels. So, you know, the top people are up there, so they can look down on the people who are living, and they can look down on those who are down there. But down here, he's building artisans' houses. And it's interesting, you go into these houses today, and compared with the houses we're building out near the motorway, these are twice the size. So modern houses, which cost an arm and a leg of sort of rabbit hutches, older houses, which are easily obtainable, have much more space. These are his cottages, they were said, in what was then referred to as the New Town, but that name New Town didn't stick, so nobody refers to it nowadays as the New Town. But again, you can see the harmony, can't you? There's this terrace with the 2 wings and this nice overhang. Okay, some people have painted, you know, shouldn't do really, but once you've started painting, you can't stop. and attention again to detail. I mean, this thing here in Wooler Road, okay, I mean, the colour scheme's a bit odd, but there it is. And the next road, Glebe Road, I love this photo. I mean, those children, how long did they survive? Who are they? They must have lived there. There's somebody's grandparents. Did the boy die in the First War? We'll never know. But again, here in Baker Street, I mean, look at they're different. They're all different, but they match. And very clever use of colour there. I think that pink does make it stand out. And I mean, I can certainly remember when this was the post office. It tells us there. But that has been, you can see where the post office frontage was, but that's been well converted, as opposed to most of the shops, I'm afraid, in the town centre when they're converted into housing. Different story. So it's not just in Weston though. Most of Price's work was in Weston, but even in Clevedon, here he was creating the Royal Pier Hotel, extending it, and that has been wonderfully restored, and the back of it with a completely modern back. But again, I put this in to show that you can marry very modern architecture with the old if you've got a competent architect. And here it's clearly worked. I mean, to have these views out across the sea, tacked on to that, it works. It's great. It can be done. And when he died, 30th of November 1912, how appropriate that he popped over the hill to be buried in Western Milton Road Cemetery, just behind the house where he died, overlooking the church where for half a century he'd been church warden and where he had extended the roof. So here he is and his wife in the cemetery in Weston. So what a person. I mean, for a town to have one man who's created so much of distinction in Weston is really memorable. So, the stone we use, well, there are two stones in Weston, aren't there? We've got the oolitic Bath stone, which came in after the railway was able to bring it, and the local Carboniferous limestone, which is the grey or the pink limestone, and then the Welsh slate, dark grey, that was brought over by ship to start with, Knightstone Harbour, and then more latterly by train. What's happened, of course, more latterly is that when we re-roof our houses, we put tiles on, not slate. And people invariably have made mistakes in the past by putting heavy concrete tiles on and then wonder why their roof starts sagging. But that's and here I think this tells a story in Gerrard Road again. You can see on the left-hand side that house which has been cleaned. I mean, they have sandblasted, or not sandblasted, they've actually washed all the paintwork off that. And so it's now in pristine stone condition, where this one had paint on it, and they feel that once having the paint, you've got to keep painting. And so here's the stone. This is the Carboniferous limestone, and this is the oolitic Bath stone. This is, you can see here as well, they're restoring the balustrade. They're doing they've done a splendid job. So along the seafront, the two terraces, the Victoria, Albert and Prince's buildings. These are Victoria buildings, the next one Albert buildings, and around the corner in front of Marine Lake, they're the Prince's buildings. You can see here, this is Regency Weston. This is what this is what all two terraces look like, until later on we started sticking these things on the roofs to go up as we converted them into hotels, stuck sun lounges on the front, and converted gardens into car parking and beer gardens. But here, I love this house. I've never been in it, I don't know who owns it, but it's standing defiantly against progress, isn't it? It's saying, I don't care that you're a hotel, I don't care how noisy you are, this is my home, and I'm damned if you're going to turf me out and offer me money to convert it. It's one, and it just shows you what they would all have been like. Mind you, they were all in use for hotels. They were houses, yes, but people took in paying guests, so they've always had that hospitality element. James Wilson, this other architect, the one who was responsible for starting the town hall, here he creates Oriel Terrace, 1847, originally known as East Terrace. So just around the corner we have South Terrace, which is still known as South Terrace. Same architect, James Wilson. This is just, you go round from the side of the old college building as though you're going towards the Melrose car park, and it's there. James Wilson also designed this. The joke was, if Bath has a royal crescent, why can't Weston have one? So we'll build ours as well. Okay, it's not as magnificent as the Georgian crescent, but it's still a substantial crescent, and it's been nicely restored. James Wilson also built, or extended, created the castellated Uphill Manor, and the new St Nicholas Church in Uphill, the original part of the town hall, and of course the grandest of all houses on the hill, Villa Rosa. Villa Rosa no longer exists, but the gate lodge to it does, Villa Rosetta.
I've seen the name, that's something.
I'm not sure who designed Greenfield Place, so I can't say he did, but I've just put this down, 1840s Greenfield Place, rather tucked away in the shadows at the side of what is now the Melrose car park, but painted beautifully by John Hickley in his book Looking Up Weston. As he said, the great advantage an artist has is that he can just draw the whole thing, where if you're a photographer you can't, because other things are in the way and you can't get the right angle. But John's produced, if any of you haven't seen his book Looking Up Weston, it is stunning for the examples, the paintings of Western buildings. 1860s Claremont Crescent is designed, and it's still there. Odd building, but you can't quite work out what's the front. This is the front, but the sea is the preferable side, and so many of the additions have gone. These wonderful Western Royal Pottery pineapples, which would have been on all of the entrances. This to me looks London. This is a London facade. The whole thing should be painted white and be part of the Grosvenor estate. It isn't quite Western, and one or two very odd permitted developments in the past. But there we have the pineapples and the acanthus leaves, and from the seaside, that's the facade people tend to see. Well, we all know about the Royal Hotel, there by 1810, Italianate arcade. Now, these people, Gabriel and Hurst, they were Bristol architects, so they extended the Royal Hotel when they turned it around to face the other direction, and also built Royal Terrace at the side. So here's the Royal Hotel by Gabriel and Hurst, 1849, and then the following year the Royal Terrace by the same company. And out of that I have airbrushed out of that the college, which sticks up just behind it. So who says the camera doesn't lie? A couple of years later, I mean, this is frenetic building, isn't it? I mean, you've got one terrace, one crescent, and then a year later another one. Here's Manila Crescent being built by Henry Lloyd, another Bristol architect, in what is known as the Clifton Italianate, and horrendously messed about now. This is what the tops were like. I mean, look, these hideous things on the... fortunately, the rest of the facades and the balconies are all there. Just imagine if all of that were painted the same colour. How grand it would look, just for a pot of paint. Because it's handsome architecture. It really is. And up at the top on the hill, Henry Lloyd builds his Atlantic terraces in between his Holy Trinity Church. So he's responsible for that. The Pevsner Guide, the latest edition, said, and I love this quote, "More confidence than judgment Italianate." But you know, it's grand stuff, and the views from there are stunning. And some people are spending a lot of money on restoration work. Some are spending nothing. That's what happens in terraces. There are these pillars being rebuilt. Meanwhile, down on the flat, Moffat, London architects come in to build Edinburgh Crescent, 1855. And remember, Edinburgh Park was not dissected by Walliscote Road. Edinburgh Park was the front garden to Edinburgh Crescent, right the way down to the beach. So you'd have been pretty wealthy living in these houses with that. But it didn't last long, because 20 years after that there was an economic decline, and Napoleonic wars, and people were moving out. Houses were being divided into flats. Montpellier Terrace, another one, rather handsome terrace, and Southside in this wonderful ecclesial Gothic style. I love these windows. And interestingly, Henry Butt, who in the 1920s and 30s started buying up property to divide into what became known as various mansions, you can see on the left-hand side, that's exactly what he did. But did it very well. Local stone, he just happened to own the quarry, but always building in a style which was sympathetic. So that doesn't look entirely out of place, does it? Even though it's a clear addition. What I find odd about this is the use of brick. I can't quite see why the brick has been used there. Probably they were running out of money. Bristol Road Lower. If ever a terrace needs love and attention, a town centre terrace, it's this one, isn't it? I mean, some of those properties are really, really uncared for. But as a sweep around the road there, just up from the YMCA, it's really good. Meanwhile, up on the shrubbery, this was a hugely exclusive estate. This is where the best people lived. And here's a map of the estate, and there are only 1, 2, 3, 4 properties. The first property is Villa Rosa. Now here is Villa Rosa, James Wilson's enormous house there, built, taken down in the 1960s. When the landowner started to divide that up for other houses, it was only 4 big houses, and then the land for those 4 big houses was subdivided into smaller houses, which by today's standards are still enormous, but that's the way the estate gradually changed. So Villa Rosetta is still there, but Villa Rosa itself replaced by that block of flats. And as you know, the bridge, which was from Villa Rosa into the apricot garden on the other side, so the owner didn't have to walk and meet people as she went over. And its own private water supply. There's the water tower, still in use, not as a water tower, but the tank is still there, and it's now in residential use. The second of the large houses, Overcombe, and I took this photograph. There was a big planning issue over this, and eventually the house came down and it's been replaced by a block of flats. So that was the second of the large houses to come down. Third one is still there, Combe Bank, looking very much like a Regency rectory. It's still there, divided into flats. And Combe Cottage, which was not really a cottage, but that has gone. That is now Victoria Place, where the Queenswood Hotel is. So those are the 4 big houses which constituted the Shrubbery estate. Gradually the estate was developed, and we now have what it is. Meanwhile, along South Road, we have these individual houses. Some were Gothic, some were Italianate, some were ecclesiastical, but they were big, huge houses. And 2 of them are still in single family occupation. I mean, these are massive, massive houses. And quite often with these wonderful turret things, touch of the ecclesiastical architecture there. And Henry Butt's last house at Eastville Park, that's where he lived and died. And as you come down from the hill, so the houses get a bit smaller. So here we have Atlantic Road South, so we're now talking of semi-detached rather than detached. One of the concepts of Western building, of course, was the private shrubbery. And here you can see what is now the Melrose car park, but this This is Royal Crescent, this is Park Place, and this is Greenfield Terrace. This is Royal Crescent. You can still see it's open land there when this photograph is taken, and that's what it is now, the car park. Built in the days when people could pretend they were incredibly wealthy. Because if you looked out from your house onto this private land that the hoi polloi was not allowed to set foot on, you could claim it was your estate. In fact, you were sharing it with your neighbours, but it gave the illusion of grandeur. It's the same as Royal York Crescent, isn't it? It's the same as Royal Crescent. It's the same as our Royal Crescent. It looks grand, and it is, because you're part of this huge building, but you only own that bit in it. Shrubbery Park, that was another exclusive park to the people who live around it, and it is still there, but it's no longer exclusive, because anyone, it's owned by the council, anyone can go there. But the vestiges are still there, aren't they? As you can see here and in front of the old water tower, and football things put there for kids to play. So the greenery is still there, but it's now public. Here though, it's still exclusive. This is Eastfield Park, and it is still the exclusive preserve of the people who live here in the houses and flats. It's not public space at all. It's not maintained by the council. It's maintained by the people who live here, and they have exclusive rights to it. And here, the little exclusive park tucked away behind Mollescott Road in Wilton Gardens is still there, though I'm not sure who owns it or who has rights of access. I certainly know it is not a public park, and it's not maintained by the council, but it clearly is maintained. Meanwhile, up at Westcliff, we have these Elizabethan-style villas, again 1840s, overlooking Prince Consort Gardens, which is now has the status of a town green, so can never be built on it. Has not that anyone was actually proposing building on it, but it's public open space. And everywhere on the hillside, we've seen properties converted. This is always happening. Landerman Circus, it was a school, then became a hospital, now it's residential. So these things happen. Here at the junction of Queen's Road and St Joseph Road, St Margaret's, which was it was run by sisters who ran it as a children's home during the war. I mean, this goes back a long time, and it's still in therapeutic care, use, isn't it? It's now a home for people with challenging mental disorders. As you enter the shrubbery, of course, eccentricity hits architecture. I mean, I love this building. I can't think which country it comes from, but there's a touch of Switzerland in it, and I love this sort of what a thing to have over the entrance to your garage. And these wonderful arrow slits. So if the damn man from the council arrived, that's the end of him. Or even you could look out of this window, couldn't you, and pour the boiling oil down on it. It's pure fantasy. And this, I mean, who on earth now would design it's fun. It's great fun. And here, just off the seafront, attention to this. I love this Gothic Great Western Railway style. And these windows, they've been properly maintained. It's so good. And gate pillars. I despair when I see, certainly in the lower part of the town, gate pillars standing in splendid isolation because somebody's just knocked the front wall down to get car parking and left these poor pillars standing in isolation, serving no purpose whatsoever. Gate pillars are there and walls are there to say, this is my castle, keep out. You can only come in if I give you permission to come in. Now we just knock them all down and nobody cares. And here, what could be more eccentric than this, tucked just up in South Road? Again, straight out of Switzerland, isn't it? Down on the flat again, typical Western style. And as you move further along the flat, further towards the end of the 19th century, so the amount of money diminishes and the quality of housing changes, and there are more terraces being built. But even here, St Paul's Road, these are substantial buildings. And then you get into Severn Road, Moorland Road, and we come to buildings then which have their commercial individuality. This is a Hans Price building, built as a furniture repository, which it's still Lalonde's, yes, and it's still in the same sort of business. This is French, isn't it? This is the French mansard roof. This could easily be in Paris. There could be a revolution going on around here, or this could be a street cafe. It's France.
Is it never a fire station? It looked like a fire station.
No, it was no. It was built for the purpose that it still is. And here, all banks and post offices came from an era of such self-confidence. And a bank, in order to attract business, had to look better than the next door bank. And so there was a great competition in the way you build banks. And here we have the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. Nobody calls it that now. But as a piece of architecture, I think it is stunningly beautiful. It's proud. It says, we can be trusted with your money. Likewise, Lloyd's, they can be trusted with your money. Even after the war, when the bit was bombed and they put, what an opportunity exists here to restore this, paint this, get it could look. This is post-war stuff. Let's stop pussyfooting around and pretending we don't like it anymore. It's there. Let's do something with it. And this is my favourite. This is the Italianate, what became the Westminster Bank. But if you go into the SAS bar now, the bar is still the original counter because the counter was listed and had to stay there. So if something is not going to be a bank anymore because banks don't need the space, why not turn them into restaurants and bars? And with care, it is possible to do the right thing. I mean, here, I've been looking around some of the replacement windows in Weston. This is in the Boulevard where there was a planning application to replace timber sash windows with timber sash. The bill when it came was so enormous, probably 10,000 quid. And so the owner said, could we go for high quality UPVC replacement, making sure that everything is right, the transom bars are all, and they were put in. So here you have to get quite close and touch them really, so that it's plastic, not wood, but it works. So it can be done, but so often in Weston people have put in plastic windows with the wrong width of plastic. They just look wrong. Or worse still, if somebody owns that flat and somebody owns that flat, and that flat has one type of window and that horrid. Here again, the solicitor's office in the Boulevard, they've put in UPVC replacements, and they've taken those bars aren't quite right, but it's a good effort. What a pity though, at the top, those squared off horrible things which completely spoil it. Modern glass, of course, is a problem because it's such a sheen from it that you get that reflection. We can't start making bad quality glass just because that's what our Victorian forebears had. Here in Alfred Street, this is an establishment run by one of the housing corporations, associations for youngsters who are just moving into looking after themselves for the first time, and they had to put new windows in. All done really, really well. So they took care to do it properly. But here's a real issue. This constant battle about, well, why can't I do what I want? It's my house. Yeah, okay. So you do what you want, and then you end up with that. I mean, quite why that would encourage anyone to go to a dentist. But apparently today you can have your teeth whitened for half the price. Getting away with it, of course, because these are temporary signs for which you don't need planning, but the law's changed, and so these are now being told to get rid of them. And there are obviously right ways to do things and wrong ways. You have to stand back and look at something, and then, God, why do they do that? I mean, look at that rooftop extension in Locking Road. I mean, is there any reason why that thing should have been dumped onto. It just makes no sense at all, and it rather it degenerates the whole area. And once that starts with one property, it's a contagion. It's the next property, the next property. And here, I mean, look at some of these awful mistakes from the past. These two up in the shrub. It's horrendous. That's in Montpellier. This is just Moreland Road. But they're past mistakes. Hopefully these sorts of things are not going to be created again. But it can be done well. I mean, this is a block of flats in Cecil Road, woods behind it. It's modern. It makes no pretense to being anything that it isn't. But it sits there. The colours are right. The proportions are right. The roof line is right. And it just looks okay. Why not? Or here, Roselle House, which replaced the Roselle Hotel. I have no, it's all personal, isn't it? I have no personal objection with that. It's an attempt at something which is slightly Art Deco-ish. I should think the views from these two penthouse suites are pretty spectacular. But again, it's not an annoyingly bad bit of architecture as, say, the Premier Inn could be described. And there's no reason why we can't. I mean, this is behind the old hospital, Henry Butt House, bang in the town centre, just off Alfred Street. Modern housing. It's not trying to be what it isn't. It's modern, but sensibly 3-storey. If you're in the town centre where land is not easily available and you have a car, and who doesn't have a car, why not build a 3-storey house with a garage and entrance on the ground floor and your house above it? Sensible use of land. It's also sensible if we get a flood, which not like, and you've only got the garage down there and all the electrics are up there, hey, not too bad. But that's a sensible use of limited land space, plus enough room for the car to go. And you don't make any pretense about having a front garden. You don't have one. If you live in a town centre, you don't necessarily expect to have one, but it's been well thought out. Here, some of my favourite council houses are here. This is Milton Green. 1919, the Addison Act was passed, encouraging local councils to build houses fit for heroes, the troops coming home. So the very first council houses, Weston is up there with the first. We build council houses before anyone else does. And these are built in that sort of rural, idle way. These are country cottages. They can be painted. They do have nice stone. The proportions are. They are, I think, wonderful bits of English cottagey architecture. There's still a really warm style about them. And that whole area of Milton, around Milton Green, is composed of these 1920s first off the drawing board council houses. Many of course have been sold and because they're highly sought after now. Back in the town centre, look at George Street, 1870s, straightforward, no messing about terrace, with a lick of paint, could be quite attractive. And here in Palmer Street, this could be a northern coal mining town, but it isn't, it's Weston-super-Mare. And fine buildings, handsome buildings. Drove Road, how many people ever stop to look at these terrace? I mean, there's this wonderful terrace with the 2 blocks at either end, this one in the middle, and again, in that arts and crafts 1920s style. Very, very attractive. But how often do we, because we're driving along, we don't notice, and cars are there. And a pot of paint in Alma Street. If this were Chelsea, that would be, you'd be talking about the value in millions, wouldn't you? But here you are, bang in the town centre. You don't need a car to go to Tesco. Convert the former shop, make it look attractive, give it a decent colour scheme. In Alma Street, why not paint these buildings? These aren't the original Bath stone buildings, so make them look colourful, make them look attractive. Camden Terrace. Now, nobody goes down Camden Terrace, because it's a little one-way thing, but there it is. Paint can be very useful. I like the vibrancy of this. I'm not sure that painting your bath stone in purple and then dividing the gable like, come off it. You know, have a word with your neighbours and do the thing properly. Trees very much part of the urban complement. Weston prided itself on trees. A lot of street trees have gone. Civic Society has replanted many, but I think we need to get back to that day of looking out on trees. I mean, this is a fine one, isn't it? At the junction of Albert Quadrant and the Boulevard. It really is it makes a powerful statement in the street scene. So does this one in Jubilee Road, or though quite how the people in the house put up with this sort of subtropical thing in front. I don't know, but it's wonderful, really. You almost expect to see the bananas dropping off it. And shop fronts, so important, and the council is now issuing a shop front guide designed for public consultation. People, when they walk past a shop like this, tend to look at it. You walk past something that's just plate glass, no stall rising, just walk past. These are interesting. And you imagine if we could regenerate something like Meadow Street with proper shop fronts, a bit like the lanes in Brighton. And paint helps. And this is I'm going to finish off with a few before and after shots now. Just a lick of paint, it changes it. The very ugly post office telephone exchange. What can you do with a building like that other than knock it down? Well, a pot of paint actually has helped to make it look much better. People, particularly on social media, always going on about how good things used to be and how dreadful everything is now. And, why don't they just go and die? Moan, moan, moan. But look at this view. This is what the view along from the town hall into Carlton Street was like. That's the Dolphin Square corner. Is that a thing of beauty and a joy forever? That's what it is now. So it's not exactly worse than it was, and it's a bit more vibrant, and the colours have clearly been organised to match, and the lines match, and it makes some architectural sense. It will make even more sense if the buildings were in full use, but that's a different issue. But go back before that, and this is what that street was like, and go back before that, even further back, and that's what it is. So change all the time. One building taken down, another one goes up, that comes down, another one goes up, and this is what it might be tomorrow. So we've gone through a whole series of the same street, just looking, then, now, further back, even further back, and looking to the future. So change happens all the time. So, today and tomorrow. Here we've got the view of the Winter Gardens and that sort of shed thing in front that sells fish and chips. And this is the view of what it might be if the Royal Hotel actually does what it's got permission to do. I have my doubts, but that's another issue. Or what it is currently and what it could become, looking up a widened spider lane to the Italian Gardens. Or from the Italian Gardens, looking, as we currently do at the hotel, the widened spider lane where we are now sitting here, and the frontage of the Royal Hotel with the frontage of the extension. So this would become a new area for coffee and what. This is the future. So, always remember, I'm sure I don't need to remind you of this, but in places like Weston, look up and we'll always be able to see Old Weston just above us. And even, I mean, I love these buildings at Big Lamp Corner, but if you fancy a walk up onto that awful NCP car park at night time and take a photograph looking down, it can even look attractive if you've got a good photographer. Ian Hurd took that photograph. So it's the way we look at things, isn't it, which helps us. So, here's the big question. Once upon a time there was a Western style. Is there ever likely to be a style which we could turn around and say, that's Weston-super-Mare? Or is architecture, is urban architecture throughout the whole of the world now so uniform that we can't tell a development from one country to another, and never will be able to? I don't know. It would be wonderful to think that in a century's time people could come back and say, that's the 1920s, the 2019s, the 2020s, 2030s Weston-super-Mare style. Will that ever come back? I don't know. So there we are. That is the end. You've been a great audience for the past 5 weeks. It's been a great pleasure for me to give this series of lectures. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing it, and I can only hope that we use the town motto that we can forever look forward. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm 2 minutes ahead of time. Yeah.
I've probably lived in Oriel Terrace for 40 years, but we never found out why is it called Oriel Terrace.
Yes, that's an incredibly good question.
It's not Oriel windows.
Yeah, well, there aren't any Oriel windows, are there? So why is it called Oriel Terrace? For your homework, I don't know. So come on, somebody amongst us find out why it's called Oriel Terrace and let me know.
Lives there.
Oh, you're going to tell us?
No.
Oh, you're not?
I've got another one.
Oh. Right.
You mentioned on Nightstone Island Arthur's Tower.
Yes.
Who on earth was Arthur?
Well, I don't think Arthur was a particular person. There were 3 buildings there, and one of them was called Arthur's Tower. I think they just they had the Nightstone, King Arthur. I don't think it was a person. I think they were just playing around with a name. Yeah, that's what I think. I've never come across a name. I've never come across a surname to go with the Arthur. So, okay. Any other questions?
You mentioned.
Oh,
sorry, I'm on a roll.
Getting your money's worth.
You mentioned up in the woods stone cairns.
Yes.
Danny and I went to a postcard fair. We bought a postcard with a large cairn
Yes.
in the woods
Pick winner.
called Pick Winner, and I'm sure there's a wonderful anecdote.
Pick winner, give me a good dinner. And the idea is this was a great pile of stones, a cairn, which had been there since medieval times, and it's where the fishermen walked from Whirl along the track at the top to go to Bearn back to do their fishing, and every time they went past they would put another stone on the cairn and recite pick winner, give me a good dinner, and photographs are taken, postcards made. Total hogswash. There is no history to it at all, other than somebody in the late 19th century dumping a pile of stones there. And then people started adding to it. But it's one of those, I mean, again, history is full of those lovely little tales. It's a bit like social media. It doesn't have to be true, you just pass it on. And you know there are a million other people who pass it on as fact. And they, well, you bought postcards of it. So total nonsense, but
Is
great
it still
fun.
there?
Yeah.
Is it still there?
I don't.
I saw it 30 years ago. It was still there 30 years ago.
I can't remember. I will go for a walk.
Well,
It's not
there's
immediately
another
obvious.
story that
Sorry, you're saying it's not?
It's not immediately obvious
No.
because I've tried looking for it a couple of
Right.
times.
I think it's just gradually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite
Yeah.
low now. But
It used. I mean, it
it's
used
just
to
a
have.
pile of stones.
It used to have a fence around it, but that's
It's
all.
not there now.
Yeah.
It's just on the bushes.
Why maintain something that's a complete bit of fiction? So, yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great seeing you all.
Thank you.
Enjoy the song.
Thank you.
Right.
Can I just, I happened to go to Skersey yesterday.
Skersey?
Yeah. And the church, this school there, the primary school, you were showing the tower. There wouldn't be it. I mean, it's very interesting for a tiny little place like Skersey.
Yes.
That it's got this, you know, same period as the Wallascott Road School.
I don't think it was Hans Pratt. John Norton, who
Not quite sure
did the school at World
folders are.
and Tinsfield, he was active down there.
Ah.
He's had one
Okay.
I'd need to do some research on I'd need to do some research on that. So.
Well, thank you. It's been fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, John. Week 3, another one I missed.
Yes.
I know Graham's loading it onto the internet, but it's not there for some reason. I think.
I know nothing. Ask
He
Graham.
has sent it out.
Sent it up. No. I've got the link. I've gone to the link, but week 2, 3, and 4, and 5 is not there for some reason. And I just wondered whether it's on.
You'll have to ask Graham. Is he?
That's what I'm dealing with. I thought you might have had it on.
No, because I've got it on. I've got it on my memory stick.
Could you send me week 3?
How do I do that?
You got my email.
Yeah, but how do I send the page? I can make it into a PDF.
You only get 4 hours.
And send that.
Yeah.
Here's Graham. He can tell us what.
It's all right. I've been speaking with Graham anyway, but I thought just in case what I've asked him to do is delay. It's all right. Don't worry.
Okay.
It's in
If
hand.
there is a problem, email me.
Yeah.
And then I'll transfer the
All right.
PDF.
Okay, yeah.
I've sent the PDF of the old
Yeah,
Western Farmhouse.
I've got
You want to go down
That
in
came
10
through,
years,
didn't it?
it's
Yeah.
still
John,
there.
is there a way of getting anything, you know, because I looked online to watch all the lectures,
that.
great, so I can show my husband. Any leaflets or any way of printing anything off that's like background information, or is it better to go to the museum and look it up for ourselves?
If, I mean, all I've got, because it's all up there and there.
Yeah.
If there's anything specific you want, just send me an email and I can email things to you.
And you give your email address through the college or...
Works on
Oops. Send it. If I give you my home email,
Yeah. And then if you can email you, yeah. Start doing our wanderings around the town and think of something.
There's about 5 or 6 other graphs up there.
Excellent. That's
Bosh, that's the name of my dog, my initials JRC.
Yeah.
Just
Yes, lovely.
send me an email and I'll have it on.
Thank you. Thanks for doing your job. Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
no, anything on there will be this recording. Do you mean on the YouTube account, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just me these, that's all it is. Just the videos that we recorded.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah, oh, okay.
What I suggested 2 years ago.
So if I can do is probably ask John if he can maybe email a copy of his PowerPoint, or you can take it, or you can maybe just put one slide. Yeah, but that's not from John, because all I've got in the videos, unfortunately, so you
What you
can tap him
need
out.
to do is drop me an email, because we said we'd give you 150 quid, didn't we? The treasurer will want a paper trail.